Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with tensions escalating in the Middle East. An Egyptian soldier has been killed in a clash with Israeli troops at the Rafah border crossing in Gaza. The death comes after an Israeli airstrike killed an estimated 45 Palestinians at a camp for displaced people in the territory. We get more from Bloomberg Middle East anchor Jumana Bersetchi.
But the big question for the international community is whether or not what happened over the weekend constitutes a red line as far as the U.S. are concerned, and whether actually it would lead to any impact on the shipment of military equipment or even a pause of the military equipment that the U.S. had promised to provide Israel with.
Bloomberg's Jumana Bersetchi says Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called the airstrike in Rafah Sunday a, quote, tragic mistake.
Well, Nathan, former President Donald Trump is taking a hardline stance on pro-Palestinian demonstrations on college campuses. According to a report in the Washington Post, he told donors at a recent event in New York that he'd deport student protesters, and he praised New York City police for clearing the demonstration at Columbia University. Trump said he supports Israel's right to continue its war on terror, but donors at the gathering say he didn't mention Prime Minister Netanyahu. The two have not spoken in years. Trump has complained about Netanyahu publicly after he acknowledged President Biden's win in 2020.
Well, meanwhile, Karen, closing arguments are expected today in Trump's criminal hush money trial in New York. Bloomberg's Amy Morris has a preview.
Prosecutors will present their summations first as they try to convince the jury that Donald Trump falsified business records. They have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump intentionally made or directed others to make false entries in business records, did so with the intent to commit another underlying crime, and sought to conceal the commission of that crime. Now, the defense only has to sway one juror, because the verdict has to be unanimous. If the jury deadlocks, the judge can declare a mistrial. Judge Juan Merchan said last week he hopes the jury will get the case by tomorrow. Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Amy, thanks. Back at the White House, the Biden administration is unveiling a new approach to climate policy. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and other cabinet officials are recommending that companies be allowed to use carbon credits to offset some of their so-called Scope 3 emissions, or those generated by their suppliers and customers. Carbon offsets have been criticized in the past. Some of the methods used to calculate carbon dioxide taken out of the atmosphere have not fulfilled their claims. Secretary Yellen says voluntary carbon markets can help unlock the power of private markets to reduce emissions, but only if we address existing challenges.
Now, turning to financial markets, Karen, Wall Street gets back to work following the long holiday weekend, and perhaps the biggest market-moving event of the week is going to come on Friday. That's when we get the Federal Reserve's favorite measure of underlying inflation. We get a preview now from Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger.
The Fed's first-line inflation gauge may be about to show some modest relief from stubborn price pressures. Economists expect the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, minus food and energy, to rise 0.2% in April. That would mark the smallest advance so far this year for the measure, which provides a better snapshot of underlying inflation. Fed Chair Jay Powell and his colleagues have stressed the need for more evidence that inflation is on a sustained path to their 2% goal before cutting the benchmark interest rate. That rate has been at a 2-decade high since July. Jeff Bellinger, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Jeff, thanks. We also continue to hear from several Fed officials this week. This morning in Tokyo, Cleveland Fed President Loretta Mester said the U.S. Central Bank should consider ways to better communicate to the public how economic conditions will affect future policy decisions. Mester recommended 2 key changes, adding more words to the Fed's post-meeting policy statement to describe how officials assess economic developments and potential risks to the outlook, and more detail to its quarterly summary of policymakers' economic forecasts.
Well, here's a milestone, Karen. For the first time in 100 years, stock trades on Wall Street will have to settle in a single day. The shift to the system known as T+1 will cut the time it takes to complete every transaction in half. We get more from Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta.
This used to be a T+5. This used to take 5 days to settle trades. And the reason back then that they had to kind of shrink the time was because so many people were getting involved in the stock market. It was called the Roaring 20s for a reason. Fast forward a century later, you see the same kind of impulse to get involved in the stock market in 2021. And that's where all of this comes from. The problem is there are some teething pains that come with it. And so when a lot of people are hitting their desks today, they're going to be saying, okay, well, let's all kind of brace for impact here because there are liquidity concerns, there are staffing concerns, there are technical glitches that could go wrong as they adopt the system.
Now, Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta says this isn't the first time Wall Street's gone through a transition like this, but industry pros say it will be the most challenging.
Well, Nathan, the shine may be back on Apple in China. iPhone staged a rebound last month with shipments rising 52% amid a flurry of discounts from retail partners. Apple and its Chinese resellers have been cutting prices since the start of the year, and those deals are extending into the summer sales season. Shares of Apple are up more than 2% in early trading.
Yeah, we got to keep an eye on so-called meme stocks as well, Karen. They are back on the move. GameStop and AMC Entertainment are two of the most actively traded stocks this morning. Shares of GameStop are up 19.5%. The video game retailer brought in nearly $1 billion from a share sale program. AMC is up 5.5%.
And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. A series of powerful storms in the central and southern U.S. over the Memorial Day holiday weekend has killed at least 23 people, leaving homes and businesses destroyed and power outages. In Valley View, Texas, this man says he was driving with his wife and took shelter at a gas station.
It got so intense that I could feel every particle of dirt, sand, fiberglass, glass hitting my face.
The destructive storms also caused deaths in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. The big return home day for the holiday weekend was not an easy trip for some airline passengers who were impacted by bad weather in the Northeast. LaGuardia Airport and Newark Liberty experienced the worst of canceled and delayed flights. The TSA said 2.9 million people were screened at U.S. airports on Friday, a single-day record. Passengers on board a Spirit Airlines flight who came close to a water landing are now sharing their stories. The moments before their safe return to Montego Bay Terminal in Jamaica, they were having a frightening experience. This passenger says of the Fort Lauderdale, Florida-bound flight first announced he would be turning the plane back to Jamaica's airport to address a maintenance issue. And then she heard the pilot again.
And when he said prepare for emergency landing, I took my earbud out and I looked at my the two people in my row. I said, did he just say water landing? And they said, yeah.
Everyone on board was provided with meal vouchers, hotel accommodations, and were rebooked. The search for 3 men who were allegedly involved in the death of a soap star continues. Los Angeles police say 37-year-old Johnny Wachter, who played Brando Corbett on ABC's General Hospital, may have interrupted a possible car theft right before the gunshots early Saturday morning. Fellow actor and friend Colin Flynn.
Johnny's just an unbelievable friend. He such a humble, loving, passionate person. He did tons of service to help other people.
According to police, the suspects who got away were trying to steal Wachter's catalytic converter on his car. It's primary runoff day in Texas. There are 7 GOP congressional nominations up for grabs. Incumbent Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez of San Antonio is facing a fight for the party nomination against Second Amendment activist, YouTuber Brandon Herrera, known online as the AK Guy. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The Celtics not only really should have lost games 1 and 3 versus Indiana. The Pacers had late leads in both, and game 4 also close. It was tied in the final minute.
Jalen stops on a dime, dribbles to the middle of the floor, jump pass into the corner. Derek White for 3. Got it! Derek White from the right corner has given Boston a 105-102 lead.
On 98.5 Sports Hub in Boston, that was the final. Celtics finished the sweep, advanced to the NBA Finals for the 23rd time. Looks like they'll play Dallas. The Mavs are up 3-0 on Minnesota. Game 4 tonight. The basketball world remembering Hall of Famer Bill Walton passed away from cancer when healthy. One of the greatest ever. 1973 NCAA championship game with UCLA. He scored 44 points, shot 21 of 22. 4 years later, led Portland to the NBA title, and then came a long run of foot injuries, but in 1986, he helped the Celtics to the championship, and then despite a lifelong stuttering problem, Walton became a broadcaster, and safe to say there's never been another one like him. Bill Walton, who estimated that he had attended over 850 Grateful Dead concerts, was 71. No one in tennis history has dominated a tournament like Rafael Nadal at the French Open, but the 14-time champion, now 37, has battled injuries, nearing retirement, and since he was unseeded, he had to face Sasha Zverev in the opening round. Nadal lost in straight sets. Stanley Cup playoffs, Dallas came from 2 goals down to win 5-3 in Edmonton. Stars lead the series 2-1. Rangers bring a 2-1 lead to Game 4 tonight at Florida. 4 of the last 5 Ranger wins have come in overtime. Mets and Dodgers rained out, so a straight doubleheader today at Citi Field starting at 4. Yankees start a series at the Angels. Orioles' 5th straight win, 11-3 over the Red Sox. Nationals beat the Braves 8-4. Giants beat the Phillies 8-4. Angel Hernandez has ended his umpiring career after 33 seasons. His reputation was that he was baseball's worst umpire. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports, Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. We are heading into a holiday shortened trading week this morning with a lot of investor focus on what's coming at the end of this week. The Fed's preferred reading on inflation could give more of a clue on the path for interest rates for the next rest of this year. For more, we are joined in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio by Lori Calvasina, head of U.S. equity strategy at RBC Capital Markets. Lori, good morning. Always great to speak with you. So is it all about the PCE at the end of the week, or is there something else that investors should be watching out for this week?
Well, thanks for having me as always, Nathan. And look, it feels like kind of a lightish week on the economic data. I think we've got a consumer sentiment reading we'll keep an eye on, but I do think you're right. I think it's all about inflation. In my meetings, and I was on the road again last week, it all, centers around this debate over when is the Fed going to move, when should they move, but really that is the debate, and it all hinges on the inflation readings.
Now, we got even more clues just this morning on a competing network from Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari saying that he's seeing inflation move sideways and he's still not in a hurry to cut interest rates. I mean, is that the message that that Fed officials are putting out here? Is there sort of consolidation around that?
So, look, I go back to the Fed presser a couple weeks ago, and what I heard was the case being made for no hikes, not necessarily more cuts. And I think there was a little bit of confusion initially in the investment community. And I think we're sort of, in my mind at least, just sort of circling back to that initial message that was put out. I will say, Nathan, as I talked to investors last week, and I was really mostly talking to long-only investors, not hedge funds, so maybe there's a little bit of a difference in sentiment between those two communities in recent weeks. But for the most part, the folks I was talking to last week said, okay, you know what, if the Fed doesn't cut and the economy stays strong and we're trying to keep the inflation genie in the bottle, that's okay. There wasn't really a lot of consternation on the idea that we might not get any cuts this year from the investors I spoke with last week, at least.
Is that a sentiment that you share, that we could see more of a rally even if we do remain in a higher for longer rate environment? So
I generally think that the market is fine, and I think that valuations can stay fine where we are. We are at my price target of 5,300. We haven't done sort of the big second half outlook. We haven't done a 2025 outlook yet, but we do think based on sort of the messaging of where, the economy is likely to be this year, what the Fed is likely to do or not do this year, and where inflation is likely to end up, we seem fairly valued. And I know that's a little bit of a boring message, but we do feel a little bit stuck in neutral for the moment. I will say I am not in the bearish camp. We do have a few strategists who are still sitting over there, and we do think that we're sort of midway through a recovery that began off recession-like conditions in 2022. But sometimes we do get a little bit stuck in the market, and that's how I'm feeling at the moment.
Well, it does seem as though the bearish camp is getting lighter and lighter by the day. Not a whole lot of bears left, at least among prominent voices. Could that potentially be a contrarian indicator if we have potentially too much bullishness in the market right now?
It's a great point, Nathan. And as someone who's been knocking around the equity strategy world for, I think it's been like 23, 24 years since I made my way into the first strategy job as a peon, mind you. But the reality is that is something we do tend to learn when you tend to see strategists, sort of rush to, kind of all raise their targets in a market that's been rallying and surprising expectations. It makes you want to stop and pause and reflect and be very, very careful. And I'm not saying that they're all wrong. We do talk about our valuation work as more of a compass, not a GPS. We do generally side, with the bulls over the bears in these scenarios. But I do think when we just look at data, we look at AAII, we look at CFTC, sort of hard weekly data points that we continue to get, they're still showing us sort of either at froth on the CFTC data or on the cusp of being frothy again on the AAII data. So I do think this is a good time to maybe just sit and think a little.
Got about a minute left. If we're sitting and thinking on the S&P 500 level, does that carry through into broader indexes like the Russell 2000?
So the Russell 2000 is weakening again. And we're retesting those lows that we've made a couple times over the past years relative to the S&P. And I think that's really because small caps are caught up in Fed cut optimism. And it's been kind of sucked out of the market again. That's pressured that part of the market. There's a lot of interesting stuff in terms of relative valuation. Positioning looks interesting. But at the end of the day, we need the confidence that the Fed cuts are coming to get that part of the market working again.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.